Hey there, Bookie. I'm glad to see you here. This is the episode where we'll talk about the NFC North. The first team is the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears are one of the league's premier franchises, have been around for over 100 years. The team started in Decatur, Illinois, but spent just one season there before moving to Chicago. Let's take a look at some of the important notes of the Chicago Bears. Soldier Field is the home of the Bears. The Bears have been playing their football games at Soldier Field since 1971. Before their time there, they played at Wrigley Field, the same location as the Chicago Bears. The multi-purpose stadium located on the north side of Chicago holds over 61,000 fans for a football game. The stadium is the oldest in both National Football League and also Major Soccer League. Soldier Field has become one of the city's most stopped locations when visiting the city. Historical records for the Chicago Bears. The Bears head into the 2023 season with 786 career wins. That's in over 1,400 career games. The Bears have won 17 playoff games in their career. George Halas is known as one of the winningest coaches of all time. Halas finished his coaching career with 318 wins and 148 losses. Another guy that will go into the record books is the running back Walter Payton. Payton rushed for the football nearly 39,000 times and finished with more than 16,000 yards and 110 touchdowns. Super Bowl titles for the Bears. The Chicago Bears have a long history of success, dating back to their days in the Western Division of the National Football League prior to the merger of the AFL and the NFL. The Bears have 9 NFL championships, with 8 of them coming before the merger. Famous quarterbacks for the Chicago Bears. The very first quarterback in Chicago Bears history was Pard Pierce. He made just 11 starts for the organization. Jay Cutler is the leader in passing touchdowns for the Bears, but second in interceptions. Second on the list for touchdowns is Sick Ludman with 137, but he has the most interceptions with 132. Chicago Bears Hall of Famers. The Bears have 30 players that were prime members of the franchise and another 7 that spent portions of their careers with the Bears. The Chicago Bears have a mascot by the name of Staley. He is Staley the Bear and is around at all home games in his customized team jersey on. Dick Paulman was the last player in NFL history to play without a helmet. His final game with the Bears came in 1940, and no one since has done so. The first player the Chicago Bears ever drafted was Joe Stidehar, a tackle back in 1936. Finally, Beatty, fathers of the Bears, became the first back in NFL history to rush for 1,000 yards in a season. In 1934, he finished with 1,004 yards. Next up for today is the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions were founded back in 1930 in Portsmouth, Ohio, but quickly moved the franchise over to Detroit. Lions headquarters are located in Allen Park, Michigan. Ford Field is the home of the Lions. In Portsmouth, Ohio, they played Universal Stadium. Once they moved to Detroit, the Lions had 3 locations before their current home at Ford Field. First, they were at the University of Detroit Stadium. They played there until the end of the 1940 season when they moved to Tiger Stadium. The Lions and the Tigers shared the stadium until 1974. Then the Lions moved to Pontiac Silverdome. The Lions were by themselves there until the end of the 2021 season. Finally, in 2002, the Lions opened Ford Field in Detroit. Ford Field is the home of the Lions, along with the Michigan Panthers of the USFL. Ford Field hosted Super Bowl where the Steelers beat the Seahawks. Why the Lions and who are they? Back in the 1930s, when the team was coming together, the ownership wanted to put a team together that would be the king of the NFL. They associated that with how the Lions are the king of the jungle. They also felt it would work well to have a tie-in with the Detroit Tigers, the baseball team in town. Historical records for the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions hold the worst record of any franchise between the years of 1973 and 2023. Detroit during that time is 312, 448, and 4. The 2008 Detroit Lions go down as one of the worst teams of all time. The Lions joined the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the second team to lose all 16 of their regular season games. Super Bowl titles for the Lions. The Detroit Lions have never won a Super Bowl after the AFL-NFL merger in 1970. Before that time, the Lions won 4 league championships. The Lions won 4 conference championships as well. Detroit has been the postseason 18 times in franchise history. Lions have yet to make the postseason since 2016. Famous quarterbacks for the Detroit Lions. Matthew Stafford is the Lions' leading in touchdowns thrown. He finished his time in Detroit with 282 touchdowns and 141 interceptions. Next on the list would be Bobby Lane with 118 touchdowns. Those are the only two Lions quarterbacks with 100+ touchdowns in their careers. Detroit Lions Hall of Famers. There are 22 guys as a part of the Detroit Lions, with 17 of them from Detroit Lions strictly. The other 7 guys spent portions of their careers with the Lions. The first guy in the franchise history who was inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame was Dutch Clark, probably the most famous Detroit Lions player of all time. 1989 through 1998, running back Barry Sanders went into the Pro Hall of Fame in 2004. He was a 6-time All-Pro first-team player and made the Pro Bowl 10 times. The Lions have a mascot named Rory the Lion. He wears a blue football jersey to the Lions cane with the number 1 on it. Rory is the spokeslion for the Detroit Lions Kids Club and is typically at every home game event the Lions host. Detroit also has its own cheerleaders. They are called the Detroit Lions Cheerleaders. The Lions have had 30 head coaches in their history of the franchise. The third team in this conference is the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers are the third oldest franchise in all of the National Football League in a small town of Green Bay. The Packers are the only stockholders-owned franchise in the league. Lambeau Field is home to the Packers. The Green Bay Packers started playing their football games in Hamster Park back in 1919. They played in 6 other venues before moving to their current home, Lambeau Field. Bellevue Park City Stadium, Borchester Field, Wisconsin State Fair Park, Marquette Stadium, and Milwaukee County Stadium were the venues. Lambeau Field is known by many as the Frozen Tundra, Titletown, USA, and the Shine of pro football. It is known for Lambeau Leap. After a Packers player scores a touchdown, he leaps into the front row of the stands behind the end zone. Why the Packers and who are they? Why are the Packers named the Packers? The story goes back to the early 1900s when a member of the Press Gazette of the Green Bay gave them that name. The team had their first organizational meeting in 1919 and the team's original sponsor was named Indian Packing Company. Originally, the newspaper didn't know an official name and called them the Indians. Then, the next day, the paper referred to them as the Packers. The nickname stuck from that point on. Historical records for the Green Bay Packers. The Packers were 10 wins away from 800 in the regular season. Packers have 36 postseason wins. Brett Favre is the top passer with nearly 62,000 yards. Ahman Green was terrific in his time with 8,322 rushing yards and 54 touchdowns, while Donald Driver was an elite receiver finishing with 61 touchdowns. Mason Crosby is one of the top kickers of all time with just shy of 2,000 career points. Super Bowl titles for the Packers. The Packers won 11 NFL championships before the merger in 1970. Since the merger, Green Bay has won 2 other Super Bowls, and 2 during the AFL-NFL days. The Packers have won their conference 9 times. Famous quarterbacks for the Green Bay Packers. When it comes to the Green Bay Packers, they have produced some really talented quarterbacks. The names Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, Bart Starr, Lynn Dickey, Tobin Rote, and Dan Madrowski all top the 6 passing in yards in Packers history. Green Bay Packers Hall of Famers. The Green Bay Packers have the second most players inducted into the Pro Hall of Fame. They have 30 players. The Packers also have 2 coaches and executives into the Hall of Fame. The first was Vince Lombardi. He was inducted in 1971. Ron Wolf was the most recent and was inducted in 2015. Wolf was the general manager for the Packers from 1991 to 2001. The Denver Broncos are the only team in the NFL that have never won a regular season game at Lambeau Field. Heading into the 2023 season, every Green Bay Packers home game, whether it was preseason or regular season or even playoffs, has been sold out since 1960. The last team for this video is the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings have been around since 1960 and are members of the National Football League. US Bank Stadium is home to the Vikings. They played at Metropolitan Stadium from 1961 to 1981. They then moved to Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome until 2013. That's when they moved for a season to TCF Bank Stadium, which is where the Minnesota Golden Gophers play their home games. Then, US Bank Stadium was ready, and they are there now. Why the Vikings and who are they? The Minnesota Vikings had several team names suggested to them. A few included the Chippewas, Miners, Vikings, and Voyagers. The team was officially named the Vikings, and it was meant to reflect on Minnesota's history of Scandinavian American culture. Historical records for the Minnesota Vikings. Adrian Peterson and Chris Carter are 2 names the franchise will never forget. Peterson rushed for over 11,747 yards in his Vikings career, with 97 touchdowns. Carter was an elite receiver with 1,004 catches and 110 touchdowns. The 1998 team was known as an offensive juggernaut. After that season, the Vikings had the record for most points in a season with 556. Minnesota has been to the postseason 31 times. The Vikings, though, have only been to the postseason 5 times since 2012.
Famous quarterbacks for the Minnesota Vikings. Kirk Cousins, the most current quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings heading into the 2023 season. Heading into the season, Cousins will be the 4th in career starts as the quarterback for the organization. With 2 starts in 2023, he will move into 3rd in front of Dante Culpepper.
Minnesota Vikings Hall of Famers. The first true Minnesota Vikings player into the Hall of Fame was Frank Tankerton, the quarterback from 1961 to 1966, and then again from 1972 to 1978, was inducted back into 1986. Paul Krause was next. In 1998, the safety spent 11 seasons for the Vikings. Skipping ahead to the most recently, Steve Hutchinson, the starting guard for the team from 2006 to 2011, was inducted in 2020. Other guys in the 2000s include Randall McDaniel, Gary Zimmerman, Ronnie Yeri, Chris Carter, Carl Eller, Randy Moss, Alan Page, and John Randall. Moss was inducted in 2018 and Carter in 2013. Both are known as the top receivers in the organization and even in all of the league. Final Minnesota Vikings tidbits. Alan Page, former Vikings star, is in the Pro Hall of Fame. He also was justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. There was a team in Minnesota before the Vikings. That was the Minneapolis Marins Red Jackets. They were in the NFL in the 1920s into the 1930s. A few nicknames for the Vikings include the Vikes, the Purple Eaters, and the Purple Gold. When Brett Favre signed with the rival Packers to the Vikings, he signed a 2-year, $25 million deal. When he took over his former team on October 5th, he was the first quarterback to beat all 32 teams as a starter in the league. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video. I hope you learned something new and that you'll leave us with your comments. Also, subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date with the teams left to reveal.